and has a wealth of experience. Andrew Langan-Newton comes at it from a political point of view. So first of all, Andrew Langan-Newton, how are things in the Green Party at the moment on the Isle of Man?
I think it's going really well. We're seeing really positive feedback from the Isle of Man population about what we're doing. With, in particular, Andrew Bentley, one of our Green councillors. He's doing some great work on sustainability and local produce with the market on North Quay in Douglas, which is on every second Saturday, I think.
Okay. John Curtis, obviously you take a global perspective. You've got your eye on things all over the world. How is the net zero agenda faring? Is it a developed world concept? Does it happen in the developing world? How is it?
Andy, first of all, thank you for inviting me back onto the Mannin Line with Andrew today. So net zero is progressing. It's doing very well worldwide. Many plans are in place. In particular, companies, large companies, some of those are represented here on the island, like the major banks and the auditing firms. They all have well-established net zero targets, both interim targets, typically around 2030 or 2035, and then, of course, the long-term target for 2050 for net zero. Just a reminder for listeners that net zero does not mean zero emissions. It means that there is a balance between remnant emissions that go into the atmosphere, because we can't go to absolute zero on that, and removals from the atmosphere. So many companies, including those in the energy industry, in which I've worked most of my life, have well-established plans they know that they will have considerable remnant emissions, because we'll still be burning gas and oil, we'll be using oil products for many years to come. They've already engaged in significant removals projects, Andy, for the balance that they will need to have, that they will be obliged to show. Regulatory reporting is coming in Europe, and I would suspect that regulatory reporting in the UK is going to follow within the next 1 or 2 years. And of course, the Isle of Man will need to keep an eye on that mandatory reporting as we move towards those net zero targets.
Okay. You mentioned that, if you like, offsetting emissions and offsetting CO2 emissions. Is there a panacea for this? Is there an easy fix, a silver bullet for doing this? Carbon capture, these caverns that they talk about under the sea. What's the way of doing it?
Well, up until quite recently, most of the removals, or carbon capture as it's been called, have been nature-based solutions. Here on the island, we've been talking for some time about how that might be done through protection of existing woodland, maintaining the peatlands, planting new woodland, etc. But that's not going to be anywhere near enough to balance the remnant emissions that we expect to have in the year 2050. So in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of focus, as you've mentioned, on what are called technological removals, such as direct air capture, or capturing methane, particularly, and carbon dioxide emissions at source at the factories where it's being produced. And there are various techniques which are being looked at, and those techniques typically involve re-injecting liquefied carbon dioxide back into the very same formations from which hydrocarbons have been produced. Now, this is technologically possible, and it has been done by many large companies such as BP, for example, for some years, but it has a very high cost. So it's quite likely that in some way there's going to be some form of carbon capture related to credits. So there are already carbon credits in the nature-based solution space. That's been going on for a very long time. But now we're starting to see the emergence of credits related to technological capture, and I'm sure that Kroger will be looking very carefully at that, because they will have those obligations as well.
Okay, let's get to the lines first of all. It's Julian's with us. Oh, sorry, Julian. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Andy, and hello, Andrew and John.
Hi.
Afternoon.
I've got 2 quick questions for you. First, the government's announcement that wind farms are intended to be put on the Isle of Man by 2026 it seems rushed, and with no pause for consideration of alternatives like geothermal, which suggests there's pressure to put onshore wind farms here. So my question to both of you is, has the Isle of Man government already committed to onshore wind here by signing binding contracts? And similarly with you, John, have you signed any contracts for your wind turbine data transmission business, Energy View?
Okay, well, let's go to Andrew Langan-Newton first.
So there was a study I think in the region of 1958, 1957, in Kirkmichael in the Isle of Man, which identified the Isle of Man had some of the most attractive wind speeds for onshore wind turbines in the British and Irish Isles. So since the late 1950s, we've known that wind turbines are going to be great for the Isle of Man. They were debated in 1990 in Tynwald in the legislature, and since then we've had periodic updates and debates and reports in 2004, I think, by the MUA, in 2010 by the MUA, then you've got the impact report in 2019, and now you've got the ARUP report, and now finally you've got the updated report superseding the ARUP report, and the name escapes me for that. Unfortunately, but since the 1950s, we've had evidence to show that wind turbines work on the Isle of Man and going to benefit the Isle of Man, and that's only been encouraged further by more and more evidence. And you've got legal commitments on the Isle of Man government to decarbonise by 2030. I think, is it 35% reduction in 2018 baseline, and then by 2035 a 45% reduction. And you've got public policy commitments as well for the Isle of Man government, and then you've got the 2050 net zero under the Climate Change Act. So you've got a mountain of legislation saying yes, and you've got a mountain of technical evidence saying yes as well.
Okay, John Curtis.
Yes, just to follow up from what Andy said there. The Isle of Man does have an interim target. Actually, I think it's 2035. They've
got two.
Okay. So they have an interim target, and the interim target is focused mainly, Julian, around decarbonising the energy sector, the electricity sector, and that will be a mix, as I think we all know, of different technologies. So there is the new interconnector, which they plan to put in. But also there needs to be a certain element of that coming from both offshore and onshore wind. Just to clarify, Julian, I have no contracts with Energy View, with the Isle of Man. I have no business relationship with the Isle of Man government. Thank you for the question.
Julian?
Right, yeah. Just to clarify with Andrew, has the government signed any binding contracts for these wind turbines? I noticed strange things like, for example, the Ballacannel footpath at Erie Staines suddenly doesn't have right of way. It kind of gives the impression that plans are already underway. There's obviously a planning application, for logistics, possible sound problems that will keep people awake in the likes of Port St Mary, Colby, Ballabeg, Castletown, maybe Santon. All those little hurdles. Have there been any contracts signed yet?
Well, I assume so, because as you will have seen, I assume if you've looked at it, the MUA literature they've put out about the wind turbines clearly states that they've had consultants instructed since 2022. So those consultants would have signed legal agreements with the Isle of Man government to perform certain services for them and to provide those services. So in terms of contracts, my assumption, I haven't looked at the contracts, but my assumption is those consultants wouldn't do the work for free. Now, in terms of the sound, that is dealt with in that information that the MUA has put out, and they've identified different criteria for the three sites, and now they've narrowed it down to they're not going to do the Baldwin site, and I think they're going to make the decision by September 2023 if this literature is accurate are not subject to change. They're going to decide between Sulby and Erie Staines by September, and they in that document they said that they don't see the sound as being an issue, and Erie Staines, I think, has the best social outcomes off the two sites, Sulby vis-a-vis Erie Staines, in terms of the social interaction.
Okay, final word, Julian.
I've got one brief quick question. Andrew, your colleague Michelle Hayward has made two public statements recently, and I quote, "If we'd moved to wind farms years ago, we'd have cheap electricity now." My question is, which jurisdiction in the world has reduced their electricity prices by installing wind farms, as I can't find any?
Michelle Hayward, I don't know that quote directly, but I would agree with her if we were in the premise that if we had taken action in 1990 or even back as 1958, we would have benefited from huge savings. And you see, I think, different areas around the world that have gone carbon neutral in terms of their renewable energy, where they have really lowered the price. The problem you have in a hybrid model is the price is so influenced by the gas price, or certainly in the UK, or the fossil fossil fuel price, which, as we know, following the UK war, has gone up significantly, and that's undermined the cost reduction. So what we should be moving is to these places around the world that have gone towards 100% models, where the price is dramatically dropping as a result of renewable energy. We know it's the cheapest form of energy generation in terms of solar power, in terms of wind power. We know it's the lowest form of carbon dioxide emissions, and we know it's going to create a sustainable, cheap energy solution for the Isle of Man.
Okay, all right, Julian, thanks for calling today. Lots of calls. Let's get to David now. Hi, David. You're live with John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton.
Hello there. Hi. My main concern is about the renewables. Is it going to be regulated? And the reason I ask that, in Jersey, they've just opened their first net zero training facility. And I'll just read you a very small paragraph. It says, on-island training and assessment aims to help Jersey installers upscale as well as train future apprentices, and they must have access to high-quality training without the need to leave the island. Where is our training facility going to be located?
Okay, John Curtis?
Well, I think you need to ask Manx Utilities about that. They're managing that whole process.
Right. I mean, you would assume that Manx Utilities and the government have got this in train, in that if we are going to be putting pumps, if people are replacing fossil fuel systems, that we'll have people who know how to do it on the island, Andrew Langan-Newton.
We've got a facility at UCM, a great facility that's open there to provide that services among other, I guess, industry standard providers. I went along to a CPD session for electricians. I'm not an electrician, but I wanted to go and see, which was about fitting of solar panels. That was at Comus earlier this year. And so more and more of that is going to only improve the outcomes for consumers in the Isle of Man. But certainly UCM is there and can provide that facility, and we would look to the Department of Education to increase and put forward an aspirational investment into the kind of training in fitting air source heat pumps, and fitting solar panels, and fitting insulation, and fitting electric charging units as well.
Okay, thanks, David.
Hang on, Andy, before you go.
Okay.
Can I just say, I'm very disappointed in the answer just been given there, because in 2020, UCM College stopped the training for gas fitters and apprentices, so now they've got to go off island, and same with the oil Offtech, you've now got to go off island. And I phoned the Net Zero people in St John's, and they suggested there's a good college I could go to train on the outskirts of London.
So no facility, as far as they said, on the Isle of Man?
None whatsoever. I phoned up building control and I asked them, could we give me an insight into what's going on and what qualifications, etc. And they told me the best course of action I could do was get in touch with my MHK, because they did not know what was going on. And that's from building control, who's going to be overseeing this. It's an absolute mess.
Okay, Andrew Langan-Newton.
But that was just for gas and oil. I wasn't aware of that. But we know that gas and oil heating systems are not going to be the future for the Isle of Man, and they're getting zoned out legally by 2025. And
but they still will be in existing properties for years, presumably.
Well, I don't think there'll be a linear transition. I think there will be an exponential transition towards low carbon fuels as the adoption only increases and we get consequential reduction in prices.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if people do have gas boilers or oil boilers, they will still have to have them serviced every now and again, presumably. So that could be decades yet.
I would be surprised if it was decades.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, David. Good to hear from you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, I want to go to Mary now. Hi, Mary. You're live on Mannin Line.
Hi, that was a very good call from that gentleman. A very interesting point. We live in a house built in 1969. I have gas central heating, and we're retired. There's not a chance I'll be changing anything anytime soon. I might have to. I don't know how, but that isn't the point. But it's fantastic. Any new build next year will now be eco-friendly and no fossil fuel use. But there are thousands upon thousands of homes like mine, but also the ancient right of man to light a fire. So why aren't we starting with simple steps and educating the general public? We don't stand a chance when I think in the UK now it's been banned any sale of domestic coal. Am I right? From May this year, there was a ban on selling domestic coal. And here on the island, we still import domestic coal for burning. And we have no, clean air zones. I live in a town. We have new residents nearby who burn foul domestic coal. I cannot believe in 2023 I cannot open my doors or windows without the smell of coke burning and the obnoxious, dangerous fumes.
What do you think should happen?
Allowing it.
What do you think should happen?
Well, government should be leading the general public, i.e. banning the burning for a start of a simple thing like domestic coal. I mean, I'm looking on the site and telling businesses to stop. They do sell smokeless fuel coal. Why? And it's even cheaper than domestic coal, but people aren't buying it. They're still buying domestic foul coal. I can't believe it.
Mary, what about wood?
Yeah, I have a wood burner. I burn kiln-dried logs, and I know it's all going to have to stop. But I do burn kiln-dried logs, which are... But to actually... The coal is the worst fumes, dangerous fumes you can have. I'm sure these gentlemen would agree. And yet we are still permitting it. And yet there are other options available which are cheaper. And I just cannot believe we're still permitting it, especially in urban areas.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Good to hear from you.
Thanks.
John, it would seem to indicate a lack of joined-up thinking where that's concerned, if we're burning coal.
Yeah, I share the previous caller's concerns about the number of qualified technicians on the island. When you go through a transition, we have to maintain the support for existing systems. Andy might be right, it might be exponential, but there will always be some properties. It's the same for vehicles. As a matter of fact, we're going to need mechanics to increasingly look after older cars as those cars are phased out in favour of electric. I share the concerns about the number of technicians on the island and about the ability of the government to attract properly qualified people to the island because of the cost of property, the cost of living, etc. And I think there should be more done with respect to vocational courses around the requirement for qualified technicians. I think it is a concern and it is something that needs to be addressed.
If the government's not making it easy, because if we're moving towards this the net zero future, surely the government should be making it frictionless. It should be easy for the general public to move down that path. And if they're putting barriers in the way, psychologically it doesn't send out the right message.
I wouldn't say as much barriers as perhaps not as much effort to identify the fact that in the next 10, 15 years there will be a shortage of people who are still qualified to maintain the existing boiler systems, at the same time having the skills to look after the heat pumps, which are increasingly going in, and more courses and more direction for the children leaving school. It will be a good, I would say it would be a pretty good well-paid job for the people who have those courses. But of course, it's all in the hand of industry, Andy, and the companies on the island who are involved in that type of maintenance. They need to see a good future for. They have to hire the people and train them, and they have to take the cost up front. So some form of government assistance in terms of those vocational training courses, I think, is a very good idea and would be appreciated by the public.
We're with Andrew Langan-Newton and John Curtis today, talking about our net zero future. And John's with us now. Hi, John, you're live on air.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Andrew, John. Just a couple of questions, if I may. On the Climate Change Act 2021, we had the Section 21 responsibilities of public bodies. And there's a couple of key parts in there regarding sustainable development and protecting and enhancing biodiversity, together with a just transition program. I think it's quite clear the sustainable development isn't something that's being picked up by the government as we look at it at the moment with projects like the test centre, the old people's home. And then even if we look at MUA's existing infrastructure, so we have the sewage treatment system where they're using electricity to dry the sewage, and then that's going into the incinerator. And then the just general use of energy from waste, where we're putting jet fuel in, we're putting tyres in. sewage waste going in there? What are the carbon emissions? What are the greenhouse gases that are coming from existing MUA infrastructure? And then we have the responsibility to protect our woodlands, heath and peat, and we've got this transition idea of putting a wind farm with a ton of cement and roads and destruction of habitat in the vision of making ourselves net zero. It just doesn't make any sense.
Which direction do you think we should be going, John?
I 100% behind going for net zero, but just a careful and studied approach to it. I think Andrew mentioned earlier there was studies in 2004, 2010, 2019. At no point during that time has Erie Stain, which is an area of biodiversity, been identified. So I'm really at a loss as to how that's come about now. And there's lots of things that have happened in the background. We had somebody talking about roads. We've had a change of ownership of the quarries. So there's definitely things happening in the background, and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, Andrew Langan-Newton.
So yeah, I guess there's lots to unpack there. In terms of renewable energy as a concept and wind turbines against other forms of renewable energy, it's clear that the data shows wind turbines are the best for the Isle of Man. Green Party are keen advocates of this. For a comparison, they're talking about putting 20 megawatts of wind turbines in by 2026, and also in the region of 20 megawatts of solar, 10 megawatts private, 10 megawatts government. That might generate maybe 20 gigawatt hours a year from that 20 megawatts of solar, where they're talking about Erie Stain site generating about 136 or 135 gigawatt hours a year, about a third of our annual consumption of electricity in the Isle of Man. That shows that it's a really efficient site. That's going to be really positive for reducing our carbon emissions and also the sustainability of our planet as well as our island, both economic sustainability but also sustainability for our biosphere. The RSPB in the UK says that climate change on their website, climate change is the single greatest threat, long-term threat to biodiversity loss globally in places around the world. So we really need to focus on the legal commitments and our societal commitments to reducing our carbon emissions. In terms of Erie Stain, when it first came out, I was surprised at Erie Stain as a site because I had seen on like the 2019 impact study, Curran's impact study, Appendix 14, the sites Dorby, just I guess northwest of Erie Stain was identified, and further up to Snuff the Wind. So I was a bit surprised at Erie Stain, but having looked at the more recent literature the Manx Utilities have put out, they're saying that Erie Stain was also included in that 2010, I think is it AEA study, or I forget the acronym, but the 2010 study anyway, which was then built on by Curran's 2019 impact study. So with any decision, there is going to be a biodiversity impact, and the MUA are saying that in their documentation, whether it was going to be the Baldwin site, the Sulby site, the Erie Stain site, there's going to be an impact on biodiversity, but they are identifying Erie Stain as the site with the lowest in terms of the heathland and then the peat issue, which they've highlighted as a really concerning issue. If we're going to put the wind turbines in, are they going to cause a greater impact to the biodiversity loss in terms of heath loss? And they're saying that Erie Stain, that's not going to be the issue, and peatland's going to be minimal.
On a personal level, will you be able to see the turbines at Erie Stain?
Me?
Yes.
I presume so. I live in Port St Mary. Well, I don't know actually. But it's
often asked, would it bother you personally? No,
absolutely not. And whenever I go to the UK, whenever I drive past the power station in Pulrose or drive past the Ceta Sand on Richmond Hill, they're just there. They don't bother me. They don't hurt me. And I think what the Isle of Man government could have done a long time ago is maybe put up one wind turbine so people could have come and see it, look at it and realise what it does, what it connects to our society, how it makes our society more sustainable economically and through carbon emission reductions.
Okay. Sorry, final word, John.
Yeah, and as I say, 100% behind sustainable and looking after the whole planet. But I think that's the key issue here. Is what we do is we hide behind the creation of these turbines. We don't account for any of that CO2 emission in building them. So if you're putting it on a forest and you're putting it on heath and peatlands that is supposed to be protected and has its own carbon capture, it doesn't really make any sense.
Okay.
I think we should have wind turbines. I'm not saying that that's not a case. I just think they need to be in the right place and this seems like a very rushed. Obviously, it's difficult because there's no survey data available. I've reached out through Freedom of Information, and we keep getting the pushback that there's no survey data available. But the survey data are available from external sources, so we can look at that.
I appreciate that, John. John Curtis, how do you think the Isle of Man government is handling its net zero target and moving towards that?
Now it's getting better. I think it was a bit head in the sand for a long time. Just to point out that the Isle of Man is the last place in Western Europe to have a single wind turbine anywhere. These have been put up and people have had to live with them. Most of us look up into the sky and we see an aeroplane flying over. We don't say that the aeroplanes need to be taken down because humanity has taken advantage of the fact that we can travel to places. So seeing a wind turbine, which I will see, I live in Port St Mary as well as Andrew, and I will see it, and I look upon it in a good way. I say that is the march of progress.
We're live with John Curtis from Net Zero Matrix and also with Andrew Langan-Newton, leader of the Manx Green Party. And if you want to get in touch, text 166 email studio@manxradio.com. You can WhatsApp. And remember, we're on till 1 today.
Hi, Andy. I love your show. I listen to it virtually every day. And every time people come on, they talk about the green agenda, electric cars, wind turbines. It's just madness. On the Kroger, why are we letting Kroger drill for gas? The Isle of Man needs the money. We need the revenue, because without money and revenue, where are we going to be in 20 years' time? So why can't we allow Kroger to drill for gas? That's going to provide an income for the Isle of Man. It's madness. Politicians need to get their head off the wobble and get on with securing the future of the Isle of Man. And maybe it should be the people decide whether we have Kroger gas drilling, because it's our future that's at stake here. Thank you, Andy.
John Curtis, Kroger gas, yes or no?
Yes, but with qualifications. So this programme is about net zero, Andy. As I mentioned right at the beginning of the programme, all of the major energy companies have got published net zero strategies. They publish their carbon footprints every year, and they are accountable to their shareholders. The energy companies are indeed the very companies who are going to resolve the problem that was created in the first place, because they are the people with the engineering expertise who are going to be able to pump the carbon dioxide back into the ground with the technological removals. The problem with Kroger, as was very well identified by Chris Thomas in one of your Mannin Lines just a few days ago, is there needs to be proper accountability. This is a dangerous business. Just like to remind your listeners, Andy, about the Macondo disaster, which was BP in the year 2010, in which 11 men died and the total cleanup cost was $62 billion. I'm not suggesting that this would happen here, but there needs to be proper consultation, there needs to be proper insurance in place, and there needs to be complete transparency about the engineering capability and the financial capability in particular of the company that's going to be engaging here, most of whom are not known because the shareholders are hidden, which is extremely rare in the energy industry. So I'm in favour of it because it's part of the transition, provided that the emissions that are generated through the creation of the gas are properly accounted for by Kroger, and that the net zero, which as I mentioned is a balance between emissions and removals, and that Kroger has a proper plan for offsetting the emissions that are going to be caused by the creation of the gas. I did a Freedom of Information request myself. No such plan exists.
Andrew Langan-Newton?
Well, the Green Party's position is very clear on this. We're absolutely against Kroger and an extraction of hydrocarbons in the Isle of Man waters, the seabed. As every day goes by and we hear more reports, we've seen Chris Thomas, I think he said on Manx Radio, but I can't recall, that his exit as a minister might have been something to do with Kroger, might have also been doing with the Liverpool landing stage. But anyway, he was also on Manx Radio suggesting what John has just said about going, they have to be held to the license as it is, which is a license to explore, not a license to extract at this stage. And I think going back a long time ago, back to 2019, 2020, I think from memory, it was going to take them 6 years from the start to actually getting gas out of the ground and making it deliverable. And John might correct me on this if I've got it wrong, but now we're talking about 2029, 2030. How is that going to be realistic against the Isle of Man government's commitments to electrification, in terms of the commitments to reduce carbon emissions? It's every day that goes by, this looks completely unlikely, and the Green Party are very glad of that. We should be focusing our energies on electrifying our society and electrifying our energy generation in terms of wind turbines, in terms of solar panels and the battery storage and other types of storage to manage that flux.
At the moment, though, we have a gas power station. We have a gas power station, and people use gas. So at the moment, we get our gas from, I think it's from the Bord gas pipeline, the Irish pipeline, which may come from here, there, and everywhere, presumably most of it coming from Norway. So if we have a chance as an interregnum to do something about that, to make some money, and if we can square off all the emissions, wouldn't that make sense for the Isle of Man? At the moment, we're using somebody else's gas, and we're just saying, well, we're passing the blame down the line to somebody else.
Absolutely not, because the government's commitment is 100% electricity is going to come from low carbon sources by 2030. So if we're talking about the place that the gas could go into the power station be in 2029, 2030, then how does that compute? Because all our electricity is going to come from low carbon sources. They're saying that by 2026, over a third of that's going to come from the 20 megawatts wind turbines and the 20 megawatts of solar. You've got Peel putting in a 27 megawatt planning application for solar. So you add that to that's 60 megawatts, 20 megawatts solar, 40 megawatts, 47 megawatts solar, 20 megawatts wind. And then they're talking about 110 megawatt undersea cable, a second undersea cable. We have an existing 60 megawatt undersea cable. So add that 60 megawatt to the added 67 megawatts of renewables that are in the pipeline as we speak, in terms of planning applications gone in for the Balawan site. They're talking about the planning applications going in 2024, I think, or before for the other sites. So actually, there's no space for that gas. It's going to be superfluous.
Okay, right, Mannin Line's on in a moment. We've got lots of texts and lots of calls to get to.
Whether you like your martini shaken or stirred, you'll find everything is just perfect at Bond's Restaurant in Onken, where your host and new owner Saeed, formerly of the Italian shop, will ensure that you enjoy a fabulous experience from the moment you arrive. Whether dining for two or holding a celebration, Bond's will exceed your expectations with superb food without the fine dining price tag. For menus, upcoming theme nights and online bookings, visit bonds.im.
We are ready to go at B&B Furniture with a wide range of managers' specials throughout the store. If it says I'm ready to go, then it is ready to go. Priced in-store for immediate delivery and no long wait for stock to arrive onto the island. Get the furniture you're longing for with no wait, no deposit required and 0% finance available when you get ready to go at B&B Furniture. It's all here under one roof at the B&B Furniture 3-story showroom in Snugborough.
B&B Furniture. No matter how much you need to dig, or how much you want to dump, Fox Group Isle of Man offer an extensive range of plant hire, long-term lease and sales. We're the island's exclusive supplier for Louis Gong excavators with immediate delivery. Our machinery comes with a complete service package with finance plan options. Call John on 458946 to discuss your plant needs. Fox Group Isle of Man, part of the Fox Group of companies.
Just Care Products for mobility solutions. At Just Care Products, we have a range of rise, recline and fireside chairs to try. These are British made and perfect for people with mobility issues. With finance available through our partner Conister. Come take a seat at Just Care Products. Find us behind B&Q, or for more information, give us a call on 627 177.
This evening at 6, you can join me, Marilyn Crellin, with the final programme in this series of Châtelet.
This particular kingdom that is a maritime empire based on the highway of the Western Seas.
Hooray, hooray, hooray. Tell me so today,
That's this evening at 6. Shack Lair with me, Marilyn Crellin, here on Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
John Curtis is on from Net Zero Matrix, and Andrew Langan-Newton is the leader of the Manx Green Party. Howard, you're live with our guests.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I was listening before to that lady that was on about the coal burning, etc., and congratulating herself on the fact that she has a wood burner, kiln-dried wood. Well, can she be certain that the equipment used to make kiln-dried wood, and the word kiln is obvious, is environmentally friendly? So she's patting herself on the back and then condemning other people for using for coal. And just as a by your leave, I have read somewhere that particulates coming from wood burning is worse than what was coming from coal burning. But that's something that maybe your guests can answer. But also, the Town Council of Douglas have a programme now. A lot of their houses are oil burning, and when the boiler is past its serviceable time, they are now fitting gas boilers. So they're going to have to alter their program radically to go from gas and an oil burner to electric. So then the people that's living in these houses are going to have horrendous bills because the gas and the oil is controllable. Electric, it's the gas. When these houses up in Anaco were first built, they were electric central heating, which was astronomical. But anyway, the question I really want to ask, all the time we hear about wind farms and renewable electricity, etc., not once have I heard anywhere from government or from the people that's promoting the wind farms, are there subsidies going to be provided by the Isle of Man government, which the taxpayers will inevitably have to pay to the companies that are erecting and operating the wind turbines? As they were given in David Cameron's days, there was huge subsidies given to the wind farms, and that was an encouragement to build them, because they knew full well that no matter what they did, they'd be getting their money back.
Okay, Andrew Langan-Newton.
Yeah, so firstly, particulates. It is a big issue in terms of health, immediate health impact, like the particulates come out of the back of the cars that damage people's lungs. You get that in close proximity with home cooking, etc., and heating. So that is a public health issue, and so the move to electrification of our heating systems, of our cooking systems, is going to benefit because it will reduce emissions and also reduce our health impact to the exposure to those particulates.
And who's going to pay for the wind farms then?
Interestingly, because if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have thought Manx Utilities might have put the wind turbines out for tender, because the private sector, I don't know, for example, Ørsted are building a huge wind farm off the northeast coast of the Isle of Man. They've had a license for it for a long time. They've set up an office in Douglas. It's been widely publicised, and they're going full throttle to build this big wind farm. They've obviously got huge expertise. They're building wind farms all across the UK and Europe. It's not a surprise that they're building that farm, but I was a bit surprised that Manx Utilities have decided to take the Isle of Man wind farm, onshore wind farm, if it's going to be at Eastane or it's going to be at Sulby, in-house, and they're going to build it. They're going to learn the technical expertise, probably with some assistance, I imagine. It is a bit of a surprise, because if their strategy is just to build another undersea cable and then just have the 20 megawatts of wind farm, they've built all that knowledge base just to build one small wind farm at, wherever it's going to be of 20 megawatts. But yeah, my understanding is that the MUA are going to control that. They're going to own that. It's going to be publicly owned. It's not going to be privately owned under an agreement where the electricity is then sold back to Manx Utilities under like a fixed price agreement. Yeah, that's the position on the wind turbines, I guess.
John Curtis?
Well, it's still cheaper than building a new gas-fired power station. So just to remind the listeners that the gas-fired power station is coming to end of life, and the decision has to be made whether or not to replace the turbines that are there, or whether to switch to the purchase of electricity that's coming across on the existing interconnector and the new interconnector. I agree with Andy. I'm surprised. I had heard that the Peel Group, who've got deep pockets, were planning to offer to build power stations, wind farms up the north.
Well, you can see that when you fly into Liverpool, you fly over Frodsham. They've got a big one on the Wirral Peninsula, haven't they? An enormous one there. Whether or not, Manx Utilities make a profit from selling electricity, we all know the price per kilowatt hour, the day rate and the night rate, etc. The cheaper rate at night. So they will have to pay for that. Manx Utilities is owned by the government, so there is an implication for taxpayers that there is going to be a cost, maybe an increased cost. It is a fact of life. Either we rebuild a new gas power station, which is contrary to the Isle of Man's obligations to net zero for the Paris Agreement, and to do that we have to switch to renewable electricity, and to do that we have to build power stations, and then we have to recover the cost of that through the selling of electricity. There is no magic bullet here. Okay, all right, thanks, Howard.
One thing though, Andy, that the chap has just been talking there, and they keep making a reference to building a new power station. The power station that's there, the building, the chimneys, the infrastructure. If you want a replacement engine in your car, you don't go out and buy a new car. You replace the engine. So why can't they replace the existing engines with new gas-fired engines? I know it flies in the aisle. The people that behold us are saying they're going to go zero, but the power station is only 25 years old. There's houses around in town over 100 years old, and they're still in use and still saleable. So why can't they use the existing modern power station structure and put new engines in?
Andrew Langan-Newton?
Yeah, my belief is that Manx Utilities are looking at retrofitting that facility, not for a gas power station facility, but for like a grid storage facility or something like that in the future. So it's not going to be a vacant brownfield site. I think it's going to be a strategic asset for the future of a decarbonised, electrified society.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Howard. We've got to move on because there's lots of messages, and I haven't done many messages, but here's one from WhatsApper 417. The Manx Utilities website explains that all the sites identified in the AEA wind farm study actually lie on peat or heathlands. Heathland is a protected habitat on the Isle of Man. It has a very high biodiversity value. It's difficult to mitigate the ecological impact of constructing wind farms in such areas, and this is why there have not been any wind farm developments on heathlands in the British Isles since the 1990s. In an attempt to skew the results of any environmental impact assessment, the MUA say there is no heathland on the Eristane site. However, environmental impact assessments carried out on the nearby quarry confirmed that there was underlying heathland and that the plantation should not be cut down because of the loss of habitat for the short-eared owl and hen harriers. They're not telling people about the access roads that have been constructed across heathland and the landing stage at Castletown Beach and ASSI, and we're being lied to by the MUA and the government. Greenwashing, they say this is. Andrew Langan-Newton?
Well, I don't know if that's entirely correct about the AEA study, in the sense that there were certain sites on the Northern Plain. I don't think they were heathland, but they've been identified as sites. But they have significantly lower wind speeds than the upland sites. And the upland sites, I think Manx Utilities are saying that there is heathland and peatland in the areas. I echo what the person said about the Eristane site. They're saying that they can carve out, so there isn't any impact to heathland, and there's limited impact to peatland. In terms of the planning application process, that's important for the whole Isle of Man society to be part of this process. And I think Minister Cannon was on Mannin Line a few weeks ago saying that there was going to be an independent inspector coming in or to do it. It wasn't just going to be DEFA running the planning application or adjudicating the planning application process. So that's great to see. suitability, and there'll be environmental impact assessment as part of that planning application. It's a legal requirement. So that's great because the whole community of the Isle of Man can be a part of how this process is dealt with, and then understanding what its advantages are as well as the consequences.
Okay, back in just a few moments' time with Andrew Langan-Newton and John Curtis. Got a very important question for John Curtis, and that is, could the Isle of Man government be in trouble legally for not getting this right?
Be smart this summer with the hottest products and sizzling offers from Manx Telecom. Snap up a new phone for sensational summer selfies and get sweltering trade-in deals on your old one. There's all the accessories you could need and unlimited calls, text and data options with roaming too means no limits to the good times. Check out manxtelecom.com/summer for details, terms and conditions, or call in store. Manx Telecom, the smart choice this summer.
There's a new way to Subway with 2 fantastic menus. Which will you go for? The all-new Subway series with 15 irresistible creations like the Big Bombay Sub, Great Goddess Salad, Emperor Wrap and Big Cheesesteak Sub Melt. Or create your own. You pick the ingredients you want and build your own sub, salad or wrap the way you want it. There's a great mix of healthy and indulgent menu items available from Subway in ShopRite, Peel and Port Erin.
Hospice Isle of Man's lottery is now bigger and better than ever before, with huge rollover jackpots of up to £10,000 and 32 guaranteed cash prizes to be won every single month for just £5 a ticket. What are you waiting for? It's the fun, easy way to support hospice and the people we care for. So sign up now at hospice.org.im/lottery or call 672222. Players must be 16 or over. See website for terms and conditions.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And Andrew Langan-Newton is the leader of the Manx Green Party. John Curtis is from Net Zero Matrix. And John Curtis, is the Isle of Man government going to be legally liable for getting this wrong? Is it? We the people have just been on the neck end of £4 million for paying off a medical professional. Is the Isle of Man? You hinted earlier on that many international companies here have got international obligations. What about the government?
Well, yes. I mean, don't they have a moral obligation, first of all, to do what needs to be done as part of a nation on Earth? But specifically related to risk, Andy, I've already touched briefly on environmental risk, which needs to be taken into consideration, and financial risk. All of us have seen the building that was going up opposite Marks and Spencer's downtown there, and it stopped because they ran out of funds. If Kroger start the project, run out of funds and can't continue, there is a risk there, a big financial risk, and who's going to pick up the tab? It's going to be the taxpayer. Now, in terms of legal risk, the UK government itself, that has already decarbonised, is already 45% on its way for its own net zero journey, is being constantly sued by pressure groups such as Friends of the Earth because they're not doing enough and they're not reaching their own self-imposed legal obligation to reach net zero. So if the Isle of Man doesn't reach its aspirations, first of all in terms of the interim target, and then in 2050 when we are already so far behind the UK itself, then there is a risk of legal action that could be taken by various parties, and that legal action of course will involve defending and will be another financial risk. So I say yes, that we need to take this thing very seriously because we've signed up to it. We have our obligation, legal and financial, and more importantly, moral risk to move towards net zero.
Okay, Andrew Langan-Newton, Fred just says, can I ask about the MUA's massive debt and where that's disappeared? Where's the MUA going to get the money from to build wind farms? Very briefly, if you would.
Well, I think the Isle of Man government many years ago, 3 or 4, they wrote down a load of debt from Manx Utilities to make sure it was economically continually be able to function its legal obligations under the Electricity Act 1996. And this is, as John's, I would echo all those things John said, this is something the Isle of Man government has to do. It's going to be better for the Isle of Man in reducing our huge emissions. We are a huge cause of carbon emissions. We have a per head of population population, about over 8 tonnes of emissions per person. That's really significant, and we are far behind places like the UK and Ireland, adjacent isles. Certainly the UK. I don't have the figures for Ireland actually. But this is something that we're going to do. We need to do, and 2023 is a significant year, and it's going to save us money in the long run. It's going to save our society in the long run.
Okay, thanks for being with us today. I wish you both a Merry Christmas. Andrew Langan-Newton, John Curtis, will you come back in the new year? We'll talk more about this.
Looking forward to it, Andy.
Absolutely, Gurmayad.
We're back to an open line tomorrow, so if you want to follow up on anything that's been said today, by all means do get in touch. Next Tuesday, former Chief Minister Tony Brown is on Mannin Line. WINT.
Caterers, get ready for racing with Robinsons. Bulk buy and save with our full range of food.